Yeah, thank you, Rita. As Rita said, I'm a PhD candidate at Amsterdam UMC, and I'm going to present you some research that is already published. And it's about gender inequality in academia and the insights that we got from the Prepared project. But research is not an individual endeavor, so I want to also thank all the authors that appear in the first slide. And also apologies from Dr. Inguagiato. She couldn't be here, but she was the lead in this research project. First of all, let me introduce you a bit the project in which this study took place. So the Prepared project, as Rita said, is a EU Horizon funded project which aims to develop an operational ethics and integrity framework in times of crisis. And it aims to do that by creating all of these initiatives, so codes of conduct and how to do guidelines, and then also different types of materials such as case studies, training materials, and some policy briefs and recommendations. But I think that what's interesting in this project is that it aims to, first of all, before making all of these very interesting materials, it aims to map the context in which research takes place. And to do that, Prepared takes a social justice perspective, and it pays attention to the socioeconomic context and also to vulnerable population and populations that are normally more likely to suffer inequalities. So I think that helps also to understand the relation between the study that I'm presenting and the Prepared project. And it's precisely in this mapping of the broader ethical challenges in which this scoping review that I'm presenting to you takes place. Because women in academia normally, we know because of previous literature, face different types of inequalities. We thought that it was actually highly relevant to know how this also affects and the relationship that it has for women researchers in pandemics specifically, because Prepared, one of the lines of Prepared is pandemic emergencies. Therefore, we had this research question, which is, what are women researchers' experiences of the COVID-19 pandemic? And you can, in fact, look at the article if you scan this QR code, and it will lead you to the published paper. You can know all about the methodology, but just to give you a little bit of a summary, we scanned over 2,000, almost 3,000 articles, and we ended up with 35 articles that are qualitative primary research, and we did then this scoping review. And now I'm going to go on with the main findings that are based on this qualitative meta-synthesis of these 35 articles that we included. And let me make a disclaimer, because we are going to use in the explanation of these findings the terms that women used in this primary qualitative data. So I'm going to talk about women, so these are people that self-identified as women. And I'm going to also talk about Black women in some occasions, because in the articles that we retrieved, they were talking about themselves, and the qualitative data talked in these terms, even though we know that identities and how one refers to themselves differ, and that, of course, gender is not only a binary construct. But yeah, I'm going to go on with the themes. We identify three major themes, which are gender, professional expectations, and work pressure, colliding identities, and support and coping strategies. And this little picture over here that has a bit of a humoristic tone is, in fact, extracted from one of the articles that we included in our study. But not all of the findings were that humoristic. In fact, they were a bit worrying. The first theme, as I said, is gender professional expectations, and we found out that women had a disproportionate teaching burden, and that this affected them in different ways. But a part of this teaching burden that was much more exaggerated in women than in men, we also found out that there were gender professional expectations related to mentoring task and pastoral work. And this means that in many, many cases, women researchers were feeling obliged to deal with supporting their peers and supporting emotionally and technically students. So they became this kind of caring role during the pandemic, even more than usual. This had consequences. And in some occasions, there were anxiety about career progression, but in the worst case scenarios, it led to women quitting their jobs. And it also led, of course, to financial insecurity, especially for women with precarious and non-permanent positions. And this also has to do with this inability to say no, because you feel that the place that you are occupying is not exactly yours, that it can be taken away. And this has been reported in many studies that we included. The next theme is colliding identities, and I remember when we were trying to find a good title for this theme, and I'm very happy that we chose this one because it really speaks for itself. It talks about how women were forced to be flexible and how this flexibility was sold to them as this good opportunity in their workplaces, but how this led to be both carers in their home and in their jobs again, and also how job was infiltrating in their personal lives in very, very different ways, which has to do with time, but also on space and even like little routines that they had to change. They also express in a very, sometimes even poetic way, the difficulties that they had to express themselves as academics and how they were just seen as mothers, as wives, as carers in general, and how this also had an effect on being able to actually do their research with security. And so that also, of course, had effects on their mental health, but also on physical health in some occasions. And I think it's important to say that Black women experience intrusions of even institutional violence inside their home places. And that, of course, women living in more gender-normative societies were the ones that were dealing with more physical and mental issues related to this. But still, women find a way to resist. And we also retrieved different strategies that women researchers had to find during this period of time, and we differentiated between external support and individual strategies. And I think that's quite interesting because we could also, in some occasions, see how different countries or geographical areas, or even like how political regimes of each country led to one of these two strategies, which I think is very interesting. There's a bit more of this in the full discussion of the article. And maybe just to give you a summary, it's worth to mention that in the external support we found very interesting initiatives called Mother Scholars Networks that appeared in social media and that were really common between Black women in academia in the States. So that's just one example of those. And then there was also many attempts to seek institutional support, and in some occasions that end with a positive note, so being actually helpful. And in some ways it was even more like, had even more bad consequences for women researchers. On the other side, we have individual strategies, and I think that's also really, really interesting because we found two different strategies. So one was just go on with all, the workload increased, but women researchers went on with all this exaggerated workload. And on the other hand, there was like a bit of a denial, like, no, this is my limit, and I'm doing this, I'm not gonna do anything else, as a way of self-care and as resistance to a system that in many cases pushed them into the margins. So we arrived to some conclusions that may not seem very, very new, but I think it's we have some good points that in fact reminded me when I was listening to what the rector said at the beginning. One of them is that pastoral care, teaching service, and all these works inside academia that are not related to publishing or to productivity are not well rewarded, and this is actually seen, and this is a bit of the main theme across all of the themes that we found. And then we also, I think it's really interesting for me to see that women do not always feel like their voices are valid and that they are not valid agents in academia. Still now, and still in some countries that have had women researchers for decades now. So I think that's also relevant and a point to highlight. But we want to end up with some positive light, and we came across some recommendations to foster the resilience of the academic system. It is important to recognize and support those who care for and are made responsible for the indispensable and essential social reproductive work that happens inside academia. Then I think also it's really important that we make mentoring and caring for students an explicit and valued rewarded task, and I think this is also very in line with what we have been hearing all morning. And then value team output over the individualistic public or parish, which is of course an issue that we have also heard a lot in research integrity. And that's all from my side, and I'm happy to answer all the questions you have.